joys would be unending. We thought our light would never dim.
Yeah, so we're going to look at that because that whole idea doesn't really jive with everything else in the Silmarillion and what the showrunners are already saying. But before we dive into that, thanks for watching. We appreciate you guys taking the time to hear us out, to hear our thoughts on the new Rings of Power. Today, Michael's here with me. Michael, you probably know, is already on the Window of the West podcast with us. And we're going to go over the trailer to the Rings of Power from a certain perspective, and we'll get into that in a minute. But if you like what you're hearing, if you like what you're seeing, please subscribe, please like, please share. The more people know what Tolkien really means, the better. The more people know what Tolkien really wrote, the better. So that's what our goal is. We want to get the word out there that what he wrote is going to be far better than anything else you'll see in any other media. Not that it can't be good, but it's going to be far better. So like, subscribe, share. We appreciate it. Thanks. And we want to get into this video starting with this quote from Galadriel. This where she says, our light would never dim. We thought our light would never dim. We thought our joys would be unending. And it seems like you wouldn't say that if you actually read the first few chapters of the Quenta Silmarillion.
So I see this from two perspectives. I see it as literarily the showrunners and Amazon attempting to set up the contrast of, we had high hopes on one hand, and then they're going to be dashed because tragedy and evil. And so it's a forced literary contrast. So I understand, I can cerebrally put myself in the mind of somebody making a trailer and say, oh, that would be good to juxtapose these two things. But if you actually were to believe that Galadriel thought this, or her people, or the Noldor thought this, you would be thinking that elves were really, really stupid, because what they've just witnessed, as we saw from the opening shot in the trailer, what they have just witnessed as the Noldor is the near destruction of their entire people that exist in Middle Earth in a series of wars and defeats at the hands of Morgoth and Sauron over the ages. And so the thought that they thought the joys would be unending, the Noldor know better than that. They know that this is not the way the world is. They're wiser than men in this regard. So this is making elves who are eminently unwise or just fools. And while if you read the Silmarillion, you'll see plenty of places where individual elves and even occasionally a group of elves behaves foolishly, the idea that the Noldor at the end of the first stage and all of the travails that they've suffered following the rise and fall of Morgoth, the idea that they would, as a race, somehow have this saccharine view of the world that they thought their joys would be unending is just foolishness. This is not Tolkien.
It's amazing to me that that's how they start this out, because the whole tale of the Second Age is the destruction of Numenor. I mean, it's the raising of Numenor, and it's the destruction of Numenor. Just like the First Age was kind of the raising of Middle Earth, in a way, right? Or did the discovery of Middle Earth, and then the destruction of Middle Earth with Beleriand and on all the rest that fell into the sea. And in this picture right here, this is Galadriel. We can see her over here on the right, in the I believe that's her in the very forefront of the boat with a lot of these short-haired elves. And she's apparently heading to Valinor to I don't know what, unless she understands that the evil is back, and this is her attempt to be Arundel or something like that. Because then we see later in the trailer, we see that her boat somewhere. Let's see. Let's find it here. Her. Yeah, here we go. So this part right here, whatever she was in, gets completely destroyed. Right, and this is completely out of character with Galadriel. I think it's out of character with the elves to make a trip back to Valinor in order to plead again, because it was made clear by them in the end of the First Age that wasn't going to happen again. So they're just making the elves look stupid. And in the other video that I posted regarding the image of Miriel and Galadriel together on the screen in a great singularity of girl power again, right? They're not only trying to make the elves look stupid, they're trying to make the male identifying elves look stupid. Because the only quote we get from a male in this trailer is Gilgalad saying in the very beginning this quote right here. So this is Gilgalad now.
Today, our days of peace begin.
Right. And so we get this one line from Gilgalad that says, "Today our days of peace begin," which perhaps is a line maybe he's talking about to them, the dwarves, and there's some sort of peace going on there, right, with Khazad-dûm, because there was some there was that sharing of not friendship so much as acceptance. But that was more, well, anyway, I won't go into that. But what they're doing then, the rest of this here, is they have all the women say all these lines about, peace is coming to an end, everything is going to go wrong, and we need to all be together. And so I think not only are they making the elves look stupid, they're trying to now set a difference, and they're leaning into what Patrick McKay says they weren't doing. And this is a quote taken from, I believe it's the Total Film, an issue of the Total Film magazine. This is what he said, right? Because he was saying, like, they're going to be true to Tolkien. They're going to always go back to the books, back to the books, back to the books. That was another quote that one of them said, Patrick McKay or J.D. Payne, the showrunners. This was Patrick McKay talking about allegory and making a piece of work that was ahistorical or where history, where the current tides of time didn't really influence the story he was writing. So this is Patrick McKay. Tolkien was not commenting on historical events of his time or another time. He was not trying to transmit a message that spoke to contemporary politics. He wanted to create a mythos that was timeless and would be applicable. That was his word, applicable. The applicability across times. Every single choice we've made at every turn of making this show has to be faithful to that aspiration, which is the aspiration of being applicable across time. Because that's what we want as viewers, which is true. That is what I want as a viewer. We don't want to adapt the material in a way that might feel dated. We aspire to being timeless. That's why these books still speak to people so much, because so much of what's in them has not aged a day, and we aspire to do the same thing. Funny, it's not aged a day. Go ahead, Michael.
Well, so I have a few things to say about that quote. First of all, taken on its face, it's completely separate from anything visual that we have seen and anything we've seen over the last couple of months. I would find that I myself agree with almost everything that Patrick McKay is there saying. Like, taken on its face about Tolkien, about the fact that people often accuse Tolkien of, like, he's just writing his pain from the World War experience and or the experience of Nazis in his adulthood, and McKay sounds to me like he's responding partially to that and saying, at the very beginning of his quote, but then the rest of his quote is really true. Everything, or almost everything that McKay says there, I agree with. Tolkien is timeless. He is not talking to particular politics. He wants it to, and to do that, to put things in your Amazon Rings of Power TV show that would seem dated, would be a mistake.
Certainly would.
So Mr. McKay, my question would be, how is it going to look 100 years from now when people look back on this 50 years from now and they see things like the forced diversity of different racial groups inside of a supposedly a hobbit tribe that's traveling together, the forced diversity amongst elves, how is it going to look when we see the one-dimensional, when people look back and look at the kind of pathetic one-dimensional view of strong women, which Tolkien gives us a view of a strong woman in Galadriel, a strong elf, female elf, over time, which is unbelievably powerful and majestic and awe-inspiring. It's the vision of a strong queen leading her people in a variety of ways.
But Michael,
how's it going to look?
No, Michael, women can't be strong unless they have a large sword strapped to their back.
Right, an unreasonably large sword, larger than any of the men's swords. Right. So in fact, I know I was being long-winded, but in fact, I'm afraid that Mr. McKay is going to find that his very work is incredibly dated, will be incredibly dated, and he is in fact doing what he claims not to do. So I agree with his sentiment, and it looks like, from so many pieces of what we're being shown, it looks like the reality is going to be the opposite of what he's claiming.
I mean, there's no doubt that they're giving lip service to what they think fans want to hear, but Amazon's desire for diversity trumps any notion that they're actually going to be true to what Tolkien wrote. There are certain parts that will be certainly true, and I brought up earlier in the other video that the visuals, I think, are the one thing that will probably be impressive, and not necessarily. I don't mean the CGI fighting and Arondir grabbing an arrow out of midair. I mean the visuals of Numenor. I mean, Menel Tarma. I mean, apparently we have at some point we're going to have the ruins of Angband, is what people are anticipating here with some of the ice areas. So we're going to get some great visuals, but visuals don't matter because the greatest visuals in the world won't carry the story if the characters are not true to what they were actually written to be, and which has proven to be incredibly successful. It's not like we're taking characters from a really bad book and writing something brand new because there was a hint of something good in it. No, these have, through the test of time, through the years of the Silmarillion and Unfinished Tales, which were 77 and 81 or 80 or 81, I think, when they were published,
Right.
and then all the histories of Middle Earth. It's proven to be true, but they're just going to give lip service back to the idea that, oh, they're going back to the books, which was another quote that I think that was it J.D. Payne. No, one of them said was like, we're always going back to the books, and they aren't, because if they were going back to the books, these characters wouldn't be portrayed in the way that they're being portrayed, nor would they be randomly tokenized into cultures and ethnicities that don't make any sense. It goes back to this whole image, right? If we go back to the image of the dwarves, where you have, I mean, again, here, if this isn't tokenization, what it was, are all white dwarves. Am I wrong? Maybe this one over here on the right isn't, but she's clearly the only one of color, right? And it stands out unless there is an actual method to that madness, right? You gotta say that this is why, ethnically speaking, she was a different color.
Yeah, that's right. It's tokenization is the right word there, and I'm afraid they're going to look really dated. I think McKay will be deeply disappointed 20 years from now when we see the final reaction to this. It's going to look really dated. So in these aspects, and furthermore, the idea that, and to go back to what we started with, the elves are being set up like all the elves except Galadriel, she's the only wise elf, and all the Numenorians except Miriel they're all blind, and we have to rely on these two characters, both of whom existed, and neither of whom did anything like what they're going to do in these shows in Tolkien's work. So,
and you can bet that Miriel, they're going to convert her into being the one who encourages the faithful, right? Encourages Elendil and Isildur to build the ships to take them over the seas before Numenor is destroyed. In some way, they're going to do that. And what saddens me with her character too is, we talked about the elves being stupid. Well, this is a stupid decision by the showrunners, because they decided that the only way to make her powerful was to make her the queen. And she was not the queen. Her rightful place as the queen was usurped by being forced to marry Ar-Pharazôn. And we don't know exactly how that happened. So that could have been a story point they could have come up with. But instead of making her the power behind the scenes that was, influencing things, and they could have done that, right? And that would have been within the realm of what Tolkien actually wrote. Right. They've made her into the powerful commander queen of the armies. And there's that shot of her astride a horse with her armor on, with what looks like painted on armor on, and they decided that this is the best way to show it. And it goes back to your point of like, this is not timeless. When you put a woman in command of the armies in a place where Tolkien never wrote it, and in a culture that just didn't happen, it's going to date it moving forward pretty obviously.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. And while I am somewhat glad that the trailer at the San Diego Comic-Con trailer that we're quoting from here dropped, because it does give us an attempt at more of a story. We're starting to actually get a story here, or the outlines of a story. The story doesn't make me feel any more hopeful for the show. It tells me that it's a story that's written. Someone came up with a story and then wanted to shoehorn in a bunch of Tolkien characters into the story. And so, you know, whether maybe that story might be a decent one in the end. The problem you have is it's their story, not Tolkien's story, and they keep trying to pretend they can have it both ways with all the damage control quotes like the one that we gave.
Yeah.
And you know, from the showrunners, where they are reacting to a large fan base's negative impression of what they're seeing, and so they're doing damage control. So, but those comments, the damage control comments, are at odds with what we're seeing with our eyes. So I guess don't believe our lying eyes is the message.
Yeah, I'm sure that's exactly where they want you to go. Is like, we're going to keep paying lip service to what we think you want to hear until you actually see it, and then you will simply be so in awe of our ability to shoehorn all these ideas into it, you'll totally forget about Tolkien.
Right. Or worse, what I'm afraid they'll do it. I mean, this is what happened actually with Peter Jackson's films, where there's a whole generation which grew up on the Jackson films, only a smaller portion of which actually launched into the books following reading, listening, or watching the Jackson films. And so I'm afraid that what might happen, and what they're kind of hoping will happen, is this in our entertainment and visually saturated cultures that we have nowadays, this will become the default that people think of when they think of things like Numenor and Galadriel and other.
Yeah.
And so that, you know, sure, I might be able to come up with a 2-page long list of all the errors and the ways in which they contradict Tolkien, but they don't care because ultimately it's their 50 hours of TV show that's going to have left the visual impression.
And that's why I disliked, and when people get mad at me for disliking Peter Jackson's original trilogy, that's exactly the reason why I dislike it, because it created the visuals in my head that I still can't get out of my head completely, right? When I read it now, I can't fully, I still feel, you know, Faramir, I still hate Faramir so much in the movies that I don't see him that way. But the other characters, he did such a good job with a lot of the looks and the feels, like I can't get out of it. Now, some of that I appreciated when it came to, I think, the Balrog. I think the Balrog, he did a great job, because Tolkien doesn't describe it well, but when it says, you know, there were the shadows of wings and that sort of thing. I don't know, the Balrog's here somewhere in this video. There it is. And I thought he did a great job with that. And so things like that I can appreciate. But then when the rest of the story, I start seeing his movie instead of my imagination, I feel like that's actually a negative. That's actually a net.
So that's a really interesting point, and I think that particular topic is one for vigorous debate amongst people that even love Tolkien, because there is an unavoidable consequence of putting Tolkien's work, even if it was put with the greatest of faithfulness, and Jackson did not put it on the screen with the greatest of faithfulness. He did it with a modicum of faithfulness, but not the greatest of faithfulness. But even if it were put on the screen with the greatest of faithfulness, you would have that effect that you just complained about.
You would, right?
Where good casting would mean that now all we think of is a young, what's his name? That
Elijah Wood,
Orlando
Bloom.
Orlando Bloom, and they like, it's hard to imagine anyone else, any other face on Frodo or Legolas or Aragorn maybe, or something. So
with that in mind, before we close, maybe let's talk about this, which is, do we want this to succeed or do we want this to utterly fail?
Now that's a good one.
Okay, so for me, I want it to utterly fail, because I feel like there's such they could tell a better story than this. Right? They could have gone the approach of, I don't know if you've seen like Yellowstone, or it was 1883, the shows there, where they were like, okay, this is our 10-hour story arc for the history of the Duttons, how they, you know, we're on a wagon train across the U.S. They could have done the same thing when it came to certain stories in Numenor and Middle Earth, and they could have had characters that were weaved in those, when Gil-galad and Celebrimbor and even Galadriel, but they decided to make this whole 50-hour long movie, and they're trying to create the entire 2,000 years of the Second Age into one 50-hour period, which is ridiculous. They could have taken the story of the creation of the Rings of Power as one series. They could have taken the story of the creation of the 3 elven rings that were separated from the Rings of Power as another series. They could have taken the story of the fall of Numenor, or the defense of Imladris, and then pushing more
that would be great.
Sauron back again through Region. They could have done those in these awesome 10-hour movies. And I think they would have been far more effective and far more awesome. And they could probably market those a whole lot better than trying to do 50 hours of 2,000 years, which is, I don't know, it drives me down. So do I want this to fail? Yes, I want this to fail because I want to see somebody else do a much better job with it in the future.
I wish they hadn't painted themselves into a corner with what you just said, Jonathan. I wish, because there are so many great 50-hour stories they could have told instead of trying to fit 2,000 years in 50 hours. Yeah. You could tell an awesome 50-hour story of the Akalabeth alone. So I, because of the choices they've made, I'm leaning towards you. I want the things that they're doing that are contrary. Let me be real specific. I want the things that they're doing that contradict what Tolkien wrote in the Silmarillion and the appendices. Those things that they do that contradict that, I want that to fail.
Me too.
However, I do believe in redemption. So I would like the first season to be received with the appropriate level of critique and reaction, so that they, as they make their second, third, fourth, and fifth season, they can do what they can to course correct and make it better and better. But ultimately, I'm pessimistic, because I do believe that they've painted themselves into a 50-hour, 2,000-year corner, and I don't see that succeeding well.
Yeah, I agree. And I think because of the certain structures, the constrictions put around them from Amazon when it comes to how to create a story, meaning the amount of forced diversity, the amount of inclusiveness and on all that sort of stuff, where take away the politics of that idea. What you're doing is you're saying the representation of that is far more important than the story to be told. And when you do that, you end up losing the story. And we can, maybe at some point, we can put together another video. We can talk a little bit about Amazon's actual statement on diversity and inclusion that must be there for all of their Amazon Prime videos, because
that would be good.
It's rearing its head here. It reared its head in Wheel of Time. And I think it's just to the detriment of it. And if you want to create a story that's like the Silmarillion, that's like, the Akalabeth and the downfall of Numenor, they could have done it without actually having to do Tolkien. And it would have been, one, it would have been a whole lot cheaper for them. But two, they would have owned the rights to their own great story. The problem is they don't believe that they can actually do that, and they probably couldn't sell it to Jeff Bezos in order to actually make something like that. So anyway, yeah. Well, thanks for your time, Michael. I know you're busy. Michael's in the midst of
moving across country.
Yeah. So we'll hopefully get you in. Maybe it'll be in a car with your iPhone at some point.
That's right.
We'll do a video. That'd be great. So, all right, everybody. Thanks for listening. What are your thoughts? Do you want this thing to fail? Do you want it to succeed? The idea between wanting to succeed and fail, a lot of the people feel like it'll introduce people to Tolkien and they'll go into reading it. Maybe they'll go into reading it and go like, holy cow, there's nothing at all like what I saw on the screen, and realize how much better it could be. But I doubt it. I'm a pessimist in that realm too. But what do you think? Let us know. And subscribe, like, share. We appreciate y'all. And we'll see you in the next one. Take care.
Take care.